pen. It's a great blue heron. It looks really pretty. The reason, we're here talking about growth, and I grew up here, so I'm part of the growth, I guess. When I was 5 years old, 1957, it was a much different kind of community back then. Nobody locked their doors. Everybody knew everybody. You could go out to the beach and not worry about getting stolen or anything out. It was just a great community. It grew up, and people came here that had different opinions, different thoughts, and of course we had to lock our doors and we had to watch out for our kids, but it's still a great community. What I want to show you, want to talk about is that, because we're a great community, there are things that we have to protect and preserve for the future generations and what we're going to do. And a lot of that has to do with our environment. As you know, there's a lot of anticipation on what is getting the water right in South Florida. What does that mean? And how does it address to our local situation? And I always like to kind of start a little bit with that history, and that is, if you're not aware that the historical flow, you can see that it was never connected to the St. Lucie estuary. Okay, this greater Everglades flow started in the upper chain of lakes south of Orlando at about 52 feet elevation above sea level. It gradually flowed in Kissimmee, and then gradually through the winding, meandering 105-mile-long river, 2-mile-wide floodplain. Took 6 or 8 months to get to the lake. And then an overflow from the lake would go south in a very shallow, about 1 to 2 foot deep flow of 1 mile every 4 days. So that took a long time, about 16 months, to get down to the south tip of Florida. By the time that water came out into the Florida Bay area, it was crystal clean, beautiful water mixing with that salt water. This Florida Bay was just fabulous and fantastic. Well, this was that river of grass. This was what the historical kind of flows were described. But some things happened, of course. We came to Florida just like we came to Martin County thinking, well, we can make it better. We want to have people move here. And the big thing is we dug canals, we dug ditches. We tried to get rid of that valueless swamp that was quoted in the state legislature in 1911. So we paid people like Hamilton Diston and others to come down and drain. We formed the Everglades Drainage District, and we built a series of canals to drain the swamp. And what another events happened was in 26 and 28, we had these severe hurricanes came across state, no warning, no radar. It killed about 2,500 people around the lake. Unfortunately, so the Herbert Hoover Dike was authorized. They dug material out of the lake, piled it up into about a 35, 40-foot high dike, and completed 1937. So if you go out to the lake, out Port Mayaca, you have to go up and over the dike and look at Lake Okeechobee. So that killed another river. That killed a river going south, that river of grass. So it could no longer flow south of the lake, and we built that about that 140-mile perimeter around the lake. Another river we killed north of the lake was the Kissimmee River. In our infinite wisdom, 1962-70, more recent time, we dug a canal, C-38, right up the middle of the Oxbows. That drained the system, and now that water takes about 2 days. When it rains up there in Orlando, the upper chain of lakes, boom, it's down into Lake Okeechobee in huge volumes, and they have nowhere else to go with it, so they dump it east and west. So that was a shame. So this is what we end up with. On the left-hand side there, that's our water management system today, run by the state South Florida Water Management District and the Corps of Engineers, and manages it. Those big arrows you see east and west to the St. Lucie estuary and Caloosahatchee. And these canals and everything dump about 1.7 billion gallons a day. Let me put that in perspective. All of us 7.5 million people that live in that white area south of Orlando, we consume about 1.3 billion gallons a day of fresh water. So we're literally dumping to the Atlantic and Gulf of Mexico more water than we consume. And I like to put a cost to that. It's about $6 million a day that's just going out to the Atlantic and Gulf, and not going south to the Everglades and not percolating down and recharging aquifers for these people in South Dade at 330 million a day that they use. So what happens up here in our estuary, of course, is these major discharges. The St. Lucie Canal was started in 1916, completed in 1926. After the hurricanes and the Hoover Dike, it was rebuilt to actually have more capacity to move water over to the east side to the St. Lucie estuary. And what that canal does is connect up to the South Fork. This is the South Fork of the St. Lucie. It has a winding natural South Fork that comes around Halipatioke Park. If you go out there, it's beautiful, about 10 miles to the south. And then the North Fork goes almost to White City and Fort Pierce. That winds and meanders and is now aquatic preserve, and that is about 23 miles north. So those two forks would naturally come together meet at Stewart, go in the middle estuary in the wide part, and join with the saltwater from the ocean through the St. Lucie Inlet. This provides us estuarine habitat, which is really fabulous and critical for the huge diversity of marine life we have. I want to point out the other canals, C23, 24. Those were built in the 1950s, 40s and 50s, primarily to drain that for agriculture, for primarily citrus groves. Now you can see they're not connected to Lake Okeechobee, so we need to remember what happens. But during these discharge events, you see these 7 gates next to the locks. The boats up at the top of the pitch are going from the estuary on the left at sea level, and they're locking up to the elevation where they need to be to go across the Okeechobee waterway, which is about 14, 15 feet in elevation. But these gates are discharging water from Lake Okeechobee out into the St. Lucie estuary at huge volumes of 4.6 billion plus per day. So you see what happens in our outer estuary. This is out near the St. Lucie Inlet. There are about 700 acres of these seagrass beds. Seagrass grow underwater. They flower or seed. They provide habitat for juvenile grouper, snapper, tons of fish and shellfish. And what happens when you cover over grass with the turbid water, it cuts that light level from reaching the grass and obviously doesn't help it to grow. But the fresh water itself also kills this seagrass, because that's why we call it seagrass. And so it has this detrimental effect. It also goes out offshore and covers over these nearshore reefs. This is the north limit of the hard and soft corals you find in the Keys in the Bahamas. This is the St. Lucie Inlet State Park Reef. It actually extends off the state park over a mile offshore, 5 miles almost to Hope Sound. So this is a beautiful coral reef environment. It's on the National Marine Sanctuary list for designation as National Marine Sanctuary, along with the Savollard Reef or the Bathtub Reef to the north. So when this plume happens, it's huge and goes out and covers over corals and lots of stuff. Lots of stuff drops out. We get over 8 million cubic yards of muck is on the bottom, and it's 4 to 8 feet thick in a lot of spots. I've dug down in it, and it's flocculent. It's all suspended in the water until you get down to the real sand bottom. You got to take cores down to there, but it's a sticky, yucky stuff, and it gets resuspended. So what happened in the last summer of 2013? I know this is a very busy graph. In fact, the district just put it out last month. But what happened, what I want to point out is you can see out of into the St. Lucie, we had about 418, and these are all in acre feet. But I want you to think about the relative numbers. We got about 418,000 acre feet from the lake. The Caloosahatchee gets over twice that, 969, because they have more capacity. But only 79,000 acre feet went south from Lake Okeechobee. Only 79. Why is that? Well, I know you can't see this number, but it's 765,000 acre feet was from the Everglades agricultural area that went into the water conservation areas, filled up those to the tree island tops, and there was no capacity to let water out of the lake south where it normally would go. So obviously we got blasted east and west, and that's what happened from May through October. Now, did it all come from, all our runoff and problems come from the lake? No, I want to point out that our local watershed contributed over 700,000 acre feet, about 230 billion gallons, while the lake contributed about 418,000. But look at the amount of nutrients, the phosphorus and nitrogen. We had 953 metric tons of nitrogen just from the lake, even though it was only 37% of our discharge. And we had all this about over 6,000 metric tons of muck and silt sediment. So combined, it was a real devastating thing. We have our own